who are thinking of moving to China to work. And I'm making this because when I started looking about 7 months ago at what I'd actually need to get a work visa, the information that I got online is very conflicting. So websites will say different things, and this is because the process is actually very complicated and the rules change all the time. So I was in China 2 years ago for an exchange at university, and then I got a chance to work part time. Back then, visas, regulations, all these things didn't matter so much. Everyone kind of turned a blind eye to it. When I came back in 2018, things were very, very different. Now the rules really matter, and everything changed in the last couple of years. This is why I'm making this video. The first thing you need to know about getting a work visa in China is that it's quite a long and complicated and expensive process. The mistake that I made, and a mistake that I think a lot of people make, is they think, well, I'll need to go to China first to get the job. Because you'll go there, you'll meet somebody, you'll go to an interview, especially if you're English teaching, you sort of think, how hard can it be? Don't do that. It doesn't work like that at all. It's 100 times easier if you do it in your own country where you're applying from. Now, I know some countries don't always have the best embassies or visas, but in almost every case, it's going to be a lot easier and cheaper for you to do it in your own country as opposed to going to China and trying to sort it out here. Now, it's not impossible, but it is more difficult. For the vast majority of people who are coming to China to work, they're going to be English teachers. And so when it comes to lots of other jobs, I've met people doing jobs in recycling, in tech. Every company is going to have its own requirements of what documents you need, etc. So I'm going to be talking mostly about English teachers. Getting a work visa on average, I would say, takes about 5 to 6 months. Just the application procedure itself. And costs around 1.5 to 2,000 US dollars. I did it in around 4.5 months. I've known people to do it in 3. 3 seems to be the minimum. I've also met people who have taken 8 or 9 months to do it, to get around to doing it. And because it's different from each country, and depending on how fast your company works that you're applying to. So if you're thinking of China as kind of like an easy travel destination to just kind of show up, get a part-time job English teaching, it doesn't really work like that. It's not that easy. Of course, if you want to do it illegally, it's your own risk. But again, that it is a risk. There are lots of videos going around of people saying, oh no one gets deported from China, it's all just talk. That's all how it was a couple of years ago. Now they do care, especially if you're working at a school or a training center. The police will come round, and they do, especially at times like Chinese New Year or whenever some international forum like a BRICS meeting or a G20, anything that's hosted in China, they really crack down on that kind of thing. So you really can't guarantee you're going to be safe. I'd say if you're looking at something casual, it's better off looking at another Southeast Asian country, somewhere like Vietnam, maybe Myanmar or Thailand, even somewhere a bit more developed like Korea or Japan. Probably the process itself will be a lot easier. So let me go through the things that you absolutely need to get a working visa. The first thing is a bachelor's degree. This is one thing which I've never heard of anybody getting a working visa without one of these. They want foreigners coming to live in China to be at a certain standard. Secondly, the thing that you absolutely need to get into China and get a working visa is a criminal background check. This has to be done, obviously, in your own country. And in a lot of cases, you have to either have your passport in your own country or you have to be there. And so if you're already in China, you're kind of stuck. You might have to either send your passport home, you might have to mail your passport back to your own country, or fly home. So you're kind of screwed if you're in China. Although in Britain and in other places, you might not have to go back home. I was applying in the UK. I didn't have to go home to do this. In America, I think it's the same in many other countries. There are some ways around the background check. One way can be, I've heard of people from the US getting around it by, if you have a criminal record in one state and you have a residency or a passport that's in another state, you can apply from a criminal background check there. Your record won't show up in that state. So people do get around it that way, but I think it's pretty rare. So these two things, bachelor's degree, background check, absolutely you need it. One thing you might have heard is that you have to be a native English speaker, either from the US or Canada, Britain, Australia, those kind of countries. This is actually not true. At my company, I'm not going to say where it is, but there are people working from Russia, Ukraine, South Africa, which used to be a native speaking country and now is not marked as that in China, France, Sweden, Belgium, all over. So You have to have some experience teaching if you're not a native speaker, but you don't have to be from a native speaking country. As long as you speak English at a fairly good level, it might be a little bit harder for you than if you're a native speaker, but it's totally possible. The second thing that you might have heard that you need is the 2 years teaching experience. This isn't true. If you have a Toefl, which is a kind of a few month qualification, basically a course that you can take that trains you with some basics in teaching and grammar. If you have that, then you can bypass the 2 years experience. This is what I did to get a job at my company, which is in the south of China. Toefl costs around £70, what I paid, which is maybe around 90 to 100 US dollars. You could take one online. So I did mine at a company called Gold Star Toefl. It takes about 1 month. They say 120-hour certificate. In reality, it takes about 60 hours. So 2 hours a night of working at it, you'll get it in about a month. 1 hour a night, you'll get it in 2 months. It's not that difficult. If you're a native speaker and you've done a bachelor's degree, a Toefl course is not very difficult. I did almost no preparation for it and I got a B. If you're kind of new to this kind of teaching, or if you're not naturally good at studying, it might take you a little bit longer, or you might find it a little bit harder. Anyway, I'll put a link in the description of Toefl Gold Star. They're a good company. They get it to you about a week after finishing it. You get an online tutor. It's not a scam or anything like that, so I recommend them. These are basically the 3 things that you need to be an English teacher. You need a bachelor's degree, criminal background check, and a Toefl or a letter of recommendation to say that you have the 2 years experience. Now, this is only the beginning once you've done all that. What you have to do once you've got those 3 qualifications is go through the verification and certification process. And this is why the whole thing takes around 4 to 5 months, because not only do you have to get these documents verified in China, you have to get them verified in your own country. And there's no way around this. You have to get them verified in your own country's embassy first, and then you have to get them verified in the Chinese embassy of your own country. So for me, applying from the UK, I had to get my criminal background check, my bachelor's degree, and my Toefl first of all verified in the British embassy, which costs around a few $100s, few £100. Then get it verified again in the Chinese embassy in Britain. And the Chinese embassy, not just in Britain, but also in America and South Africa, can be very, very specific and tetchy and inconsistent about what they actually need. When I did it, we sent off the qualifications. The qualifications themselves are fine, but they needed them to be bound in these silk ribbons, these very particular green silk ribbons, which sounds absolutely bizarre, but this has also happened in America. I've also heard this in South Africa. They're really particular on these green silk ribbons binding the qualifications together. I'll send a picture here of what these silk ribbons actually look like, because they asked for them, and then the lawyer that we'd hired called them and said, well, what kind of silk ribbons do you need? And they said, oh, it's hard to say until we get them. So that's the kind of obtuseness you'll be dealing with from the Chinese embassy. I've also heard that they can charge an incredible amount of money. When I did my verification process, it cost about around $80, $90, or around, let's say, $40 per document. I've also heard they can charge up to £1,000, up to £1,000 on the day of verifying the documents. Completely randomly. I have no idea why this happened. Another thing that can happen is that they require a passport. For some of my friends, they had to get their passport sent to the embassy. If you're already in China and you're applying for a job, and you get an interview, it goes well, you've got the qualifications, you get offered the job, then you've got to do all this verification process whilst you're in China. You've got to either fly home and do it, or you've got to get a member of your family or a friend to help you do all this. You've got to send them money home, go to the embassy, which is going to be a couple of hours drive away from where they live. That's why it's so difficult and why it takes so long. And once you've done all that, you get these documents shipped to China. You get them verified again in the local embassy in China. And then you do what's called the Hong Kong run if you're living in China. You basically go to Hong Kong for 4 or 5 days. You make the visa application there. Costs around $300. And then you get a medical check in the Chinese mainland. If that all goes well, you've got the documents, it all works out, then you're good, then you got the visa. I've just recently got mine, so it's perfectly possible. Even if you've come to China with very little money, and don't think you can't come to China and do this, because I've just done it. It's totally doable, and it's a really great experience to work here. And so what you have to do if you've turned up to China, it's a bit expensive to actually fly home and do all this. You're kind of in a bit of a catch-22 position. If you've got a job at a company, they want you to basically work for them until you get the visa for about 4 or 5 months, which is illegal. But if you don't do that, then they're not going to pay for your visa. So the only way to do it without spending a shed load of money is to work kind of illegally for a couple of months until you get this stuff sorted, which is really not ideal because the company, a lot of the time, they have relationships with the police. They have guanxi, and understanding that the police aren't going to come and arrest all of their employees because that'd be bad for business. This police crackdown was because of a couple of things. Because not only did they change the working visa restrictions, they also changed the regulations on which companies can employ foreigners. So it used to be that each company, you had to have a license just for the company that employed foreigners. Then it became you had to have a license for each province that the company worked in. So if you were in, let's say, Sichuan and Anhui, you had to have a different license for these two provinces. And just a few months ago, they changed it so that not only did you to have a license for the provinces, you have to have a license for each individual building and campus where your employees work. So that made it very, very difficult for any training center or any school to have the license to employ foreigners because it's quite expensive and it takes quite a few months to get these licenses. So we were in a position for a few months where no companies had the license to employ foreigners. And so the police would turn up every once in a while, round up whatever foreigners they could find, and just give them a fine of, let's say, 5,000 RMB, which is about $600, which is quite a lot of money. But in our case, if you were caught, the company paid for it, and nobody got arrested, nobody got deported, because the company had that kind of relationship with the police. If you don't have that kind of relationship with the police, you can just get fined and you have to pay for it. At my company, I never heard of anybody actually getting deported, although there were people detained by the police for an entire day and then forced to pay the fine. And they were told, if we catch you again doing this, you will get deported. So all of this can sound very scary and off-putting. My advice would be, number one, just apply in your own country and go through the right processes that you have to do. Get the documents that you need, the criminal background check, the degree, and the Toefl, a letter of recommendation. Get those verified in your own embassy, and then the Chinese embassy, and then stay in contact with the Chinese company online. If you did what I did and already came to China, keep your head down. If you have enough money to just live there until you can get all this sorted, then do it because you won't get into trouble. If you have to work to get it all sorted out while you're working, it is possible but not recommended because it's very risky. But with all of this said, I highly recommend going to teach in China. It's a great experience. It's really, really fun. It's worth it, I would say. It's a great experience. And don't let any of this put you off. I totally don't regret it. I would rather be here than in any other country at the moment. So I hope this has been useful because it's very, very confusing and off putting when you first hear about all of this. For me, it would have been very useful to know about all of this early on. That's all I can think of to say. And if you're thinking of coming here, then good luck.